Mark.
Hey,
Mark, it's Rosenberg?
Rosenberg, yeah.
Cool. The deadliest lift.
Yeah.
I think you might have the best tag name out there right now.
Honestly,
Social media.
at first I thought it would be just like a pun on Deadliest Catch, a Discovery show. And honestly, I thought kind of disappeared, and it has taken on a life of its own, and I'm very happy with it. I think it's a pretty good tag.
Oh, it's so suiting. Like I found your work like a few months ago. I think it either showed up on my feed or someone had sent me one of your clips, and that comes up where it's like the deadliest lift, and then you're doing these insane variations of deadlifts, and I was like, man, this is perfect.
Yeah, I think it's hard to debate if the tag informed the content or if the content just happened to work well with the tag. Probably a little bit of both. But
that's kind of what's cool about it kind of evolves over time as you start presenting it to people, and your work's great, man. I've really been loving getting into the posts that you make, not just the videos of you training, but you're also sharing kind of like some blog style posts about like, training experience.
The write-ups I usually like to call them, and I'm really glad that those have taken off so well, because I mean the videos are fun. I enjoy making them, and I hope they're fun to watch, but I really think that the write-ups they're at least the contribution I want to make, because they're actually helpful. I mean, the videos are neat, they're fun, but I want to, create value for the people that are consuming my content. I think the write-ups do that a lot better than the videos do.
Yeah, 100%. And as someone that's does that as well online, like sharing content, it's always one of those things where you're like, it's cool to post stuff that's exciting, but then trying to get that message out where it's like just finding your people and sharing, your experience and ways that you like to help. It's been really cool getting into that sort of stuff. So appreciate your work, and appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat with me today.
Oh, no problem. It's always fun to talk shop, and there's not as many chances to do it actually verbally as I would like. So
yeah, that's right, man. Are you from Canada?
No, I'm from Wisconsin, so pretty close actually. Right on the border, right over the border. But no, I'm Wisconsin, USA.
Okay, cool. It's like American Canadian kind of location. I got some Canadian vibes from some of your stuff. I was like, man, is he from Canada? That'd be sick.
Nope, just from the Midwest, or the northern Midwest.
That's cool, man. Is your 550-pound Zercher world record, is that a real thing?
It's a real lift, and as far as I know, like I haven't seen a heavy one. I usually will call it an unofficial world record, because like nobody actually validates the Zercher deadlift, which even the USAWA, which has like 300 odd lifts, they don't have the full Zercher deadlift from the floor, just the Zercher lift where you bring it to the knees first. So
that's
I haven't seen a heavy one. No one's tried to correct me in like a year now, which you know how much people like to correct people online. So So, I'll still claim it until someone shows me otherwise. I'm gonna tentatively claim it as the unofficial world record.
So that's your Zercher in from the floor on that one. So you're coming right down and pulling up. Yeah,
have to get right down to the floor and then try and yank that thing up.
I thought it'd be cool to maybe dive right into some background story, just like about your journey and how you got into training and kind of how that's evolved to where you are today.
Sure. So I started training in 2013 in the looser sense, where I was, a junior in college, and I just kind of started going to the gym because I had a buddy who went. He was my professor, if you will, and I just wanted to, maybe better myself a little bit, hang out with my buddy a little bit, and I didn't think it was going to become such a big part of my life as it is now, and it's kind of grown up to that. So that first year was just kind of like, I think most people just bro splitting a lot of machines, a lot of dumbbells. I don't think I really used the barbell. Maybe benching a little bit, but no squats, no deadlifts, ironically. And after a little bit of that, I figured, well, it looks like I'm going to take this seriously. Let's dig down and find a program. I think I spent some time on some programs from bodybuilding.com, which wouldn't recommend, but I mean, when you're new, you don't know things, so you take what you can get.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter at that point.
But at least that started making me do the barbell lifts, which I remember there was a time where I'm like, I can't possibly squat a barbell. It's just not impossible for me anatomically, which when I see people saying that are newer, it's like I'm not telling you you're wrong because I'm better than you. It's like, because I've been there. Like I've been a beginner with lots of dumb ideas, and I can maybe help speed you through that a little bit faster. And it took me to figure things out.
Yeah. How tall are you?
I'm 6'5", so
you're very
I think
tall.
I recently posted that there's a lot of lifts that are a little bit weird for me, and some things that work better for me and not so well.
Yeah.
I really want to stress that's not as big a deal as some people make it. Like I've seen a lot of tall people, mostly because they're way too skinny because they just can't eat enough food.
Yeah.
That their height is a disadvantage, and it's like that is completely wrong. Height is never a disadvantage in lifting. You are a bigger person, you can lift more. I mean,
Yeah.
look at the world's strongest men; they're all 6.5+ feet tall, and they're pretty much the strongest people on the planet because they're bigger.
100%. Yeah. And it's, I like the way you worded that too. You're saying like there's strengths and weaknesses, right? And that's, I think everyone has that idea of like, oh, I can't do that. And it's like, well, you can do that. And I think part of doing some of these things that maybe you feel you aren't good at will be also a part of finding that the things that you are good at. It's like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
you
Like
start squatting and deadlifting and you realize I'm a better deadlifter, right? And it's like, but it's not going to stop you from squatting.
oh yeah, I mean, I've been pulling back on squats because I realized that it's not a great lift for me, especially your standard free squat, particularly a straight barbell free squat. I've been doing more variations, but that's because I mean I've done the time. I've definitely explored that lift. I squat over 600 pounds, so I'm not like a amateur at it, but it's not the best lift for me. And I just don't care about as much as I used to. I mean, I still respect it because it's kind of like a strength standard. Even though there's not a specific reason why it should be like this peak of strength standards. But me, I'll spend like a third of the year just seeing where I can get that up to. But I don't train it all year round like I used to anymore, just because I don't really see the point. So I mean,
like when you got into like odd lifts and stuff, do you feel like that's when it started to change a little bit? Because I feel like that kind of changed for me too. As someone who loves squatting, it was like when I started getting into the old school odd lifts, there was like so much more to explore outside of squatting. And like I started making a little bit of that transition.
Yeah, it's been kind of a progression. Like one thing I think I've talked about this before is when I started out, I had one very specific style of training. And for the first few years, a lot of my lifting was like that. It was very focused on squat, bench, dead. It was high frequency on those, a lot of accessories, and like 6 days a week. And then, I mean, it worked at first. You're a beginner, you're relatively weak, you're not taking on too much fatigue, and you have room for rapid advancement. And after a few years of that, I hit a wall, and I spent over a year bashing my head into that wall again and again and again, trying to use the same training style, which had been working up until that point. And all I ended up with was very little progress, multiple smaller injuries, and a lot of frustration. And after that, like year and a half of just plateauing, I said, okay, I'm going to try a radically different training style. I went from my really just, I called it 5-3-1, but I wasn't following 5-3-1. I was trying to turn 5-3-1 into my preferred style of training, which is a big reason I tell people, please don't write your own programming until you're more experienced. And when you think you're experienced enough, maybe give it a year or two after that. Because you just don't know what you're doing. You're better off, following a proven recipe than using your own creations that will probably not work out so well for you. But anyways, I jumped to Deep Water by John Anderson, which is a completely radically different style of training from what I've been doing. It's very focused on very high rep volume, but very low weight, well, relatively speaking. And past that, I followed several more programs that were very different than kind of my comfort zone, and being experienced to these different types. They're still focused around squat, bench, and dead, but they're different methodologies, and like finding out, okay, there's more than just the one option, and some of them work a little bit better for me. And two, you have to kind of periodize your stuff. You can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again for years on years and years and expect to see the best results as you become more experienced. And the odd lifting was kind of a branching off of that. I got more into the habit of kind of periodizing out my year. Like, this is my summer block of this is my winter block of more focus on squat, bench, dead. This is my spring block, which is kind of bodybuilding-ish. And I just kind of started plugging in the odd lifts because they were fun. Like, not just fun. It's a bit of a spite thing. Like, my original reason was I had the home gym, so I had all this equipment around me that I could use and not feel bad about, being an obstruction in a public gym or potentially breaking someone else's equipment. So I read all these comments, and it's the whole fragility mentality. Like, you can't do this, you can't do that. This is dangerous. If you do this, you'll die instantly. You'll snap your back. Your shoulder will never work again. You've seen it. I'm sure you've seen all that before. Yeah. So I'd read these comments, and I'm like, well, you know what? I have all this stuff in my basement. I can go prove you wrong right now. Yep. So I'd start basically just doing these kind of odd lifts, like using the wrong bar, or that was most of what the early ones were, like squatting a trap bar, or benching a trap bar, or like just stuff like along those lines. Or I can use 2 barbells instead of just the one. And I just make them mostly just to antagonize these people that like stop saying that you can't do all this stuff, or you'll like be injured so wrong if you don't follow your perfect form. Like, here's an example of that not being true. Look, I'm fine. I just did this thing. I can do a super high deficit deadlift and not snap my back. So And I realized it's fun from doing it, but it really did start as kind of a spite thing, which
Yeah.
the dark background. But as I found more and more enjoyment in doing these odd and imaginative and creative lifts, or these old lifts, or these unusual lifts, I realized that some people enjoy watching them. I enjoy doing them, so I made them a bigger part of my training.
Yeah.
So I just kind of plug them in, and I think I should be clear here. Like, I don't train in the traditional sense these odd lifts. Like, I don't like do reps and sets of these weird, unusual lifts to like get better at them. Most of my training is fairly typical, regular compounds, a lot of machines, your pretty standard, accessory work. But then after I'm done with all that, I'll express that strength that I've built and that size I've built in these odd ways. So I really feel like I need to specify. I don't suggest people do all their training in these weird odd lifts. They should have a base that's, more normal stuff, but you can then take that, what you build with that base, and go to express it in strange ways. So that's kind of the disclaimer I always have to try and balance. Like, I don't.
I had some notes here about that too, because you did do a blog. It was a good one. It was called "The Odd, the Old, and the Original," and that's still posted. You have a Google Drive, right? That's
I have that long form. I think it was originally on Reddit, but now it's in a document form on the Google Drive.
Yeah, and that was a really cool way that you broke it down. So it'd be cool to go over that. So
sure.
You listed the odd. This is like the lifts that really don't have much of an established history. That was a cool way to look at it, because as someone who's gotten into the odd lifts and stuff and the USAWA stuff, it was, like there are a lot of new lifts that come up they kind of fall into that odd lift category, but they're not like the old lifts that were really done for a long period over time. So like the Scott lift, certain lifts like that. That was a cool way to kind of categorize odd. It's kind of like they don't quite have the established history.
Yeah, they're lifts that don't have like a historical component. Like a Zercher, like it has a historical component. It's been around for almost 100 years now, if not 100 years. Yeah. And then they're kind of like the modern odd lifts. They're not like completely made up nonsense like some of the stuff I do. Like, they are a thing that's been done by multiple people, but they're not something with the same kind of pedigree as like the Zercher or some of the bench press or whatever. They're like the new modern age kind of wacky show off lifts.
Yeah, kind of stuck that way. Kind of stuck a little bit with maybe, there's still a crowd that really follows this all around approach to training, which I think you really categorize that well, where it kind of moves to the old, and the old being, they were prominent at one point, the bent press, the two hands anyhow, like the pull over and press. These are the lifts that they are odd, but they really have this history to them where like lots of athletes and strongmen used to compete and showcase these lifts. And that's kind of what was the measurement of strength back then.
Yeah. And I like to think that, I guess the category of original, or maybe the newer odd lifts, though, like all the kind of the viral lifts that like one person does on IG, and then you'll see like 3 other people try it, and then more people try it, and they'll kind of like play on themselves. I like to think that's kind of the spiritual successor almost of the old school circus strongman. Like those old lifts, they were great displays of strength, but more than that, they were designed to be impressive looking. Like that was their purpose. Like, it's not, people act like the whole clout thing is this new problem of the social media age. Like, no, clout and strength has always been a thing. Like 100 years ago, you'd go and you'd pay your nickel or whatever to watch some dude take his giant kettlebell and hold over a head with the dumbbell in the other hand. And that was ultimately, besides entertainment, that was a clout thing. Like, there was absolutely a clout factor back then. And really, there always has been. Like, that's kind of what the competition is. I mean, people like act like, oh no, competition is the pure humble expression of strength. You're not just making your social media posts. Like, no, it's all about ego. Like,
oh, for sure.
That's a certain basic point. Like, once you got the strength and you'll handle your day-to-day life, everything past that's ego driven. You want to be better, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
and
for sure.
Trying to do something that's cool and looks cool and makes people think, wow, he's strong. Like, that's not just like this vain bad thing. No, that's fine. It's totally normal. It's been that way for as long as strength training has been a thing.
Yeah,
so
100%.
That's totally how I look at these new kind of viral lifts. They're the modern circus strongman.
Yeah, so you categorize those as like the original. Because when I first started,
the original.
Yeah, it's cool because when I first started reading that blog, I was like, the original. I was like, oh, that must be like the original list. And I was like, oh, these are the, I like the way you categorize
the stuff that you just kind of come up with, like,
yeah.
I wonder if I could do this. And you try it, and like, yeah, I can. And then maybe someone else is independently come up with it because like nothing's truly original. But they're the lists that don't have a name in any rule book. Like,
Yeah.
Like a squat lift, that has a name somewhere. But if I decide I want to squat a trap bar, I'm sure I'm not the first person to try that, but there's no name for that.
Yeah. Like some of the other ones you've been doing with like the 360 around the Zercher. I haven't seen the Zercher clean before either, and that's one I've been like waiting to kind of get my hands on. But
is that where you try and like pop it up? Oh,
yeah.
Where you more like upend it? Yeah.
Yeah, that was a cool one.
That is almost not so much like. That's also partially a functional thing for me. Like, I am really bad at cleaning explosively. Like, I can muscle clean most of what I could press, but what really made me want to try that Zercher clean was I watched a bit of, I think, this summer, the CrossFit Games, where they had one of the events was like cleaning up the 315 for front squat. I'm like, well, 315 is a really easy front squat, but I can't power clean or whatever the proper term for Olympic clean 315 because I'm just terrible at the movement. But I can do everything else here. And I want to say, well, I should be able to do what a 200-pound CrossFitter can do. So I'm just going to, find some way to get that bar up to my shoulder so I can front squat. So that was the impetus for me trying the Zercher clean. I'm like, well, I'm going to do this my way. I'm going to work with my strengths.
That was cool. And you kind of listed it in a nice way too, where it was like atypical lifts and typical lifts. And this is where we do get very pigeonholed in our way of thinking, right? It's like typical lifts are the ones that you train. So it's like you got your powerlifting crowd or your, Olympic lifting crowd like we're going to do these lifts. And we don't really necessarily think outside of that. And the atypical lifts are the ones you just don't train. So that's cool to hear your perspective on that.
I like to make that distinction because like there is a typical and atypical on like a population level. Like a bench is a pretty typical lift. Most people train a bench. A bench press is not a typical lift. Very few people train bench press. But for an individual, you might have someone that never trains bench press, but they do train bench press. And in their specific case, bench press is a typical lift because they have experience with it, they train it regularly, and bench press is an atypical lift. So the whole kind of point I was getting at there is a kind of a side benefit to at least sometimes incorporating lifts that you don't train, that you just do as one-offs or as every once in a while, and you just kind of work up to a max and see what you can do without training. And I think that the benefit there is that by forcing yourself to kind of lift at a high level and something you haven't hammered into your motor cortex or whatever, your muscle memory, you develop kind of a higher sense of just general bodily awareness. Like I feel that by training these, I'm not specifically not training these weird lifts, just kind of saying, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to take it to a comfortable max, and that's all I'm going to do. By doing that over and over again with a bunch of different movement patterns, I've had an increase in kind of my sense of my body. Like I can adapt to these new lifts faster than I used to be able to. Like I just have a greater sense of what my body is doing without practice. And there's definitely value in specificity and hammering in those training, because that's how you become as good as you can be at a specific lift. But if you're only specific, like you just constantly hammering your squat, bench, dead, then you lose out on kind of this general strength that you could apply to anything. Yeah. And I mean, if your only goal are to squat, bench, dead a lot, you don't really necessarily need that general strength. Like you train for your goals, but my goal is I kind of like to be strong at bunch ram stuff. I'm not going to sit there and train a weird lift over and over again because I want to do like 100 different weird lifts, and there's just not time to actually train all those. So I want to kind of build up my general unspecific strength so I can handle heavy lifts in a bunch of strange ways.
No, that's a cool way to think about it. And I've certainly experienced the same thing for me going into the old style approach to training, the all around lifting approach. It's been a very atypical kind of a journey, and it's allowed me to really get a better sense and understanding of how strong I am in different patterns and positions. And I mean, my typical lifts, I guess you'd call them, have been going up.
Yep. That's also what I found. I guess you'd call it dirty secret. The deadlift lift, I deadlift a lot, but I have not actually trained deadlift in the sense of I'm going to do sub-max sets and reps just to kind of build this up in years, or very rarely do I do that. Like, full extent of my deadlift training is what you see on posted, like all these weird deadlifts, or even my regular deadlift. I don't sit down and do a 5x5 of deadlift anymore because, one, I'm very naturally predisposed both to the movement anatomically and just, I guess, mentally. Like, I've always felt the movement being incredibly natural, so I don't necessarily need to build up the technical skill. It's just kind of, it comes to me naturally. Yeah. And I realized I could spend time training deadlift, but that is, at my level, very fatiguing. Like, people say that deadlift isn't worth it for a fatigue ratio, and for most people, it's not true because they're not deadlifting 850 pounds for reps. Right. And my point, like, if I deadlift at my max, it's a fairly significant fatigue load. So I realized that I don't need to train this very fatiguing lift because the skill component is going to be there if I train it or not. And I can work all those separate muscles in different ways that are a little bit less overall fatiguing. So that's kind of the route I've taken. Like, I don't sit down and train deadlift. I'll train my legs separately. I'll train my back separately. I'll train the hip hinge a little bit separately, but just the deadlifts, I found that I can just say, okay, I'm not going to practice deadlift, but when I'm ready, I think I'm stronger. I sit down, I load the bar, and then it keeps working, so I'm just going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't suggest that to most people, but I think that's kind of an expression like you can just train your body to be stronger and be good at specific lifts without necessarily really hammering in specific training, which I think should be kind of obvious, but it kind of isn't these days. Like, people think you need to really train lift to get that, and to be your best, you probably do, but you can be pretty damn good at a bunch of lifts without specifically training them if you build up your general muscle mass, your general strength, and your kind of general sense of bodily awareness when it comes to movement patterns.
Yeah, it's a cool perspective. And how old are you now?
I am almost 30, just got a few more months, so
cool.
If I'm to believe the internet, I've got a few more months to get all my big lifts out of the way before my body turns last. I'm unable to lift anything more than 405.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, I'm 38, be 39 in a few months. And just being around and knowing so many others that have kind of grown into the strength industry or just like training and, it's like, I feel like this is the missing piece as you get into your not super old years, but you get a little more middle-aged and you're starting to think like, well, a lot of people get really stuck in these idea of like, well, I can't powerlift anymore. So I'm just going to, fuck around. I guess my years are done. I'm going to go mess around in the gym and bodybuild or whatever, just do the old faithful stuff. And it's like, I think I'm feeling like, and just like hearing from you and some of the other people I've connected with in the last couple of years, it's like, this is the kind of the key. It's like, you do build up that foundation that we've kind of built up with some traditional approaches or typical approaches, and then you start exploring your strength, your foundation. It's like, what can I do with this? And it's been very much the same journey for me. Like, starting to hit certain numbers or break through some plateaus. And I'm like, man, this is like kind of weird considering everything, modern days, like, oh, you got to do this. It's like, to a certain extent.
I figure I still have like at least about a decade to hit peaks in specific lifts. Like, I think a lot of, like, I've read some more that like strength athletes, they really do peak in their 30s to 40s because your absolute strength doesn't taper down not anatomically, physiologically so much until you're about 40, and the extra experience from the previous years kind of builds up on that. So you lose out on like endurance sports to a certain degree, but apparently not strength. And then I'm just going to keep trying to get stronger in like a straight up deadlift as long as I can, and then just try and hold on to that once I kind of hit that point where I'm a bit too old to reasonably keep pushing up. But along those same lines, I do have another write-up about PRs, and I think a really important thing for anyone training is that you have to expand like what you think of as an applicable PR at some point.
Okay.
And that was another thing I discovered in that period where I was hitting my head against the wall, because at that time, the only PRs I cared about were my one rep max in my squat, my bench, and my deadlift. That was like my expression of strength. That was the only goal I had. And if you keep trying to just work on that those three goals, you're going to run into a bunch of plateaus and you're going to be frustrated and you're going to hurt yourself probably. And this is not going to be rewarding. So what you do at that point is you say, okay, I've got these three goals, but I can also have three more. I can have my 5 rep max in bench squats. I can have my 10 rep max in squat bench. I can add in new movements. I can add in variations. And if you expand this like degree of what your goals are, suddenly once you hit a plateau in one, you can just move to another for a while and you can consistently hit PRs there. And when you come back to your original one, you're bigger, you're stronger, and you can go back to hitting PRs in there again. Yeah. So I think a lot of people need to find out at a certain point, like, you can just have a couple of goals, but you're going to have to take, time that you're not really making progress directly towards them. And if you're going to do that, you might as well have some new goals, so you're not just sitting there for a year not doing anything.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's you got to think about this whole PR concept is like, you can PR anything. You can.
Yep, I think that was exactly the title of the post. You can PR anything.
Yeah,
and it's really a solid mentality. Like, once you realize that and you have to be careful. You're not just like saying, "Oh, I can PR anything." So you artificially create progress. You have to, still be driven and focusing. And at some point, you should probably be increasing old things. But once your ability to rapidly progress declines because you've become more experienced, more advanced, and you just kind of you get diminishing returns. It really helps to have the option to just turn folks, well, I'm going to take on this new lift where I don't have all this practice, I don't have all this technical experience. And suddenly you can gang like a beginner again because you are building that technical expertise and potentially new muscle groups and new movement patterns. And that's very, good for your body because, you've widened your foundation and you've like raised your bottom line for what like your worst lifts are, but it's also good mentally because it's always great to have actual tangible progress versus saying, oh, I've gained 5 pounds on my bench in this last year. You say, no, I've gained 100 pounds on my, I don't know, 2 barbell Steinborn squat.
Yeah, that's kind of, I've been looking at it that way now too. So I've got this big list of PRs. It's like, and then, cycling through, like once you have that foundation, that knowledge, experience, and how you've trained traditional things, it's like you can start applying them in ways to this.
I always try to add the nuance to the layer in my post. Like, yes, I know I said all those things, but at the same time, if you're new, don't try and train like me. If you're new, put your time in doing normal things, so you can get a foundation and understand your body and have something to work with, and you can start applying it to all the weird nonsense I do. If you want to work a little bit of nonsense in when you're new, go for it, but don't train like me if you've only been training for 2 years. Please, it's not going to work out very well for you. I'm not responsible for your lack of progress if you try and copy me.
Yeah, and in most of the experienced individuals, even when you read back, that was very much around build up your foundations. Squat, bench, deadlift, press, very similar type thing. Just get strong, then express and learn what your strength can do. And I think that's a really strong message.
There's a reason that bench, squat, and dead are kind of go-tos for beginners. And I agree with a lot of people. They're not the peak pinnacle of strength. They shouldn't be held on such a platform, but they're definitely great for base building, and they're easy enough to teach and learn because there's so many resources available from any gym you go to that's worth a damn is going to have the equipment to do them. So that's a great place for a beginner to start actually building that base. Is just your basic lifts. They don't have to keep doing that for their entire lifting career, but they should probably start somewhere like that. Yeah,
cool. It's kind of interesting to even ask at this point too, when you felt like you were starting, was there an approach that you felt worked almost maybe not better than everything else, but it was just you finally were man, this is really working well for me, or you really enjoyed it, kind of really brought you to some
I said, it's the absolute beginner until I hit my plateau year. It was definitely just having a program that, it programmed my squat, my bench, and my dead, or maybe variations thereof. And it explicitly told me at some point you need to do more weight. And a lot of the programs, they also include AM reps or as many reps as possible sets. And I still think that that's one of the best ways to formulate a top set in a program. I really, really love AM reps because it's, if you do them right, they're auto-regulating to, I guess, A, B, B, they're really there for where you are in a given day. And if you're feeling, okay, I'm just not there, you hit the bare minimum. You hit the bare minimum of your ramp and you move on. If you're feeling great, it gives you a chance to hit a PR. And I think that if you're up for a PR, you should always try and take that PR because it's rewarding physically, it's rewarding mentally. And PRs are good. I like PRs.
Yeah, it doesn't exhaust you as much as a max rep or max 1RM as much. Usually when you get those AMRAPs in, you feel good the next day. You're still
I guess,
ready to go.
that's the key. What I really love about an AMRAP is that a 1 rep max is a pass or a fail. You either succeed or you get nothing because you got 0 reps. An AMRAP, if you get 7 out of 8, that's however many percent. That's really close. That's still a good number. That's still that's a lot closer to reaching your goal than 0 out of 1.
Yeah.
So that's why I really like AMRAPs. It's really hard if you're pushing yourself to fail an AMRAP. You might not get quite as many reps as you want, but you still got a lot of reps.
Yeah, something to kind of at least score yourself on and feel pretty good about. Have you used other approaches for auto-regulating?
I
found that worked?
Not that much. I dabble in, but I don't particularly like RPE or RIR or any of those other ones because I just think that most people can't subjectively judge a percentage of failure. At a certain point, maybe if you practice long enough and you're sufficiently advanced, sure, it's a good way to keep it low enough. But for a beginner, a beginner doesn't know what failure actually feels like. So how can they judge 80% of failure? I think that's a big kind of rite of passage for most beginners is that they need to learn what actual full force physical exertion feels like. Because what they think is failure is just their mind giving up on them. They've never done anything hard like this before.
Yeah.
So if you tell them to go to failure, they're probably going to end up at RPE 8 or 9. They're not going to go to RPE because they just don't have the mental faculties to know how much that sucks, unless they come from like a sports background. That's why I think people, even if you're not a lifter, but you have applied yourself in a different physical pursuit, you have a heads up because you at least know what full force physical effort feels like, and you're used to that level of suck.
Yeah, I think, and even for myself, I'll never forget the first time I was in a gym and started training with someone who's more experienced than me. And it was like one of the first things before I even really knew what AMRAP was or had read about, you know, that kind of approach. It was just like, oh, we're going to drop the weight down a bit and just go to failure. And you're like, what? And you do it, and then you stop, but they're like, no, you got some more. And you're like, okay. And you do, no, you got some more. And then next thing you know, you're like, I'm full. I can't even finish this rep. And I think, you know, like, I even remember today, like, that was like that moment I was hooked, and it was like, oh, this is what it is, right? It's like,
I have a similar memory. Like, I distinctly remember there's a time when not long after I started squatting, where I was doing my sets of squat, but I was fairly convinced that the most squats I could do with 3 plates or 315 was 5 reps. So I would do 5, 5, 5. Until one day I'm like, you know what? I've been stuck at 315 by 5s for a month now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? I'm just not going to stop. I'm going to keep going until I actually fail. And I did a rep, and I did a rep, and I did a rep, and I got 315 for 12. And I discovered there's a whole new level to what my body can do on a squat based on my actual physical potential versus what my mind was telling me. And that's when I realized, okay, I don't know what failure feels like. I've never gone to failure before, and that was kind of eye-opening. And then leg days got a lot shittier after that because I did have, I need to take these a lot farther.
Do you have any like influences or mentors that have really kind of helped you or inspired you along the way?
I don't really think so much of mentors. Like, I couldn't point to a certain person like they have taught us, but I think of more like as a collaboration. Like, I will not pretend that I'm like self-made, but it's not so much I've had this great teacher. It's just I have surrounded myself with other people that are like-minded, that are also strong, and I just watch what they're doing, and I take ideas from them shamelessly. I think even like I have a program up, I like specifically said, like, this program, nothing in this program is original. Neither is anyone else's program, but I'm going to explicitly tell you that nothing in this is fully original. Like, these are all ideas that I've snatched from various people that I've either watched their content, or I've talked to them online, or I've talked to them in person, and like, oh, this works for me. I tried it, worked for me. I steal that idea, and I kind of work into my training program. So it's not so much mentors as it is a bunch of different collaborators.
Yeah, kind of finding your own message along the way within that. That's cool.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I think you said you want to talk about the whole like learning by experience. And I think that's a big part, is like surround yourself with other strong people, see what works for them, and at least think about it. Maybe try it if it sounds like hopeful. And if it doesn't work for you, then it's fine. You can just leave that one behind. But it wasn't a waste of time. You learned something that didn't work. Yeah. And the things that do work, you can keep those and work them into your own lifting philosophy. And I think that's the best way to kind of develop your own personal truth, is by taking a lot of everyone else's truths and see which ones apply to you. It's a lot easier to do that than to just blindly try a random stuff and hope that something works for you. Yeah,
for sure. Maybe we've touched on this a little bit already with just the discussion we've had, but like in your experience, maybe with like helping people or kind of seeing other people approach strength, like where do you feel people really mess up when it comes to pursuing this?
I think it would depend on kind of what level they're at. Like, as a beginner, I think probably the biggest fault, like if you're not making progress as an absolute beginner, and this is kind of mean to say, but it's probably because you're not putting in enough effort. Like, there's very few things that you can do wrong as a beginner and not progress other than not putting in enough effort. So if you're like, oh, I'm not sure if my program is right as a beginner, it's like, no, people have gotten strong as a beginner doing the dumbest programming imaginable. And honestly, they've gotten strong at much higher levels than that doing dumb programming if they put in enough effort. And that's why I say it's kind of like a beginner has to learn how to try is the first like hurdle they have to jump. And that can take time for some people. Like, if you have been inactive your entire life, you have a lot of anti-momentum that you have to work against to build up to being able to actually physically exert yourself. And yeah, that's hard, and that's going to suck. And it's going to be a lot of time where you're not necessarily making progress because you're not challenging your body, you're just challenging your mind. Yeah. So I think that would be the number one thing that people are doing wrong as a beginner, is they're just not trying hard enough, which is easy to say, but kind of hard to fix sometimes. Beyond that, I think the next kind of hurdle that people have to jump is learning to work outside their first comfort zone. Like, just like I did, I was stuck on one method of training for a while. And yeah, I mean, like I said, as a beginner, almost anything works. But at a certain point, you have to kind of diversify and do a bit of periodization, find things that personally work better for you. And if you're only used to one style of training, you're never going to experience those things. Like the next hurdle you have to jump is kind of like trying different kinds of programs. So like find a proven program that looks a lot different than what you've been doing for the last year or two, and try that and just see how those different training methods feel and how that works. And then once you've kind of tried 5 different programs, they'll kind of introduce you to random things. You can have a much better perspective on, okay, this works for me, this doesn't, because I've tried 5 different things. And you just kind of build up on that, and then maybe that can inform your next program choice. You have a bit of idea of what kind of things to look for. Then I guess you can call that intermediate. Then if you're advanced,
How do you get to advanced?
When you get to advanced, I mean, it's really hard to qualify what is a beginner versus an intermediate versus advanced. They're kind of meaningless, I think. Yeah. But if you were to take a rough idea, I'd say beginner is someone who can progress doing anything. An intermediate is a person that needs a bit more specific kind of general program. And if you're advanced, at that point, you kind of just you need your own individual path to success at that point. You need to either rely on your previous experiences to build up your own programming, or find one of the rare good coaches that will actually help you with that. So I guess that's how I break this up. But like for an advanced person that they're still struggling, like I don't think I could say, oh, this is the one thing they're doing wrong, because at that point it becomes very individual. And I think it would be wrong to say, oh, all advanced people that aren't making progress are doing this wrong, because their problems are going to be very individualistic. Mm-hmm. So they need to kind of identify where's my weak point. And maybe that involves looking at how they're trained and saying, okay, I've been doing this, it kind of works, but does it really? Am I doing this because I like it or because it actually works well? Or maybe they need enough, okay, like I've been really hammering at this technique because I believe it should work, but maybe I just need to embrace this other technique that it looks ugly, it feels bad, but it works better. Yeah. So maybe if you want to take a general approach to what advanced people need to do, is they need to kind of find where they're lying to themselves. And I'm still guilty of that. There's plenty of parts of my training, like I know that I probably should be doing this differently, but I really just don't want to. And for the most part, I keep making progress, so I just kind of push off fixing those things until something stops working. But that's probably the most general advice I give to like an advanced person, is really honestly self-audit yourself, because there's probably some things that you know aren't working that you're just kind of reluctant to let go of or to embrace.
And there's probably some kind of special like personality traits involved there when you start moving from intermediate to advanced that you kind of need to have, right? It's like the desire, will, and grit to actually push yourself. Yeah.
Because like I said, like at a certain point, like people say they want to train for health or to be functional in real life, and the threshold for what you need to do resistance training wise to be healthy and just functional as you get older, it's not that high. Like most people are not going to be confronted with much in the way of a strength demand in their day-to-day life. We live in a society that accommodates for weakness pretty damn well. Yeah. So if you want to become advanced at a certain point, you need to identify what it is you want to do, and you have to actually want it. Yeah. And if you don't want it, that's not a big deal. Like you're not bad because you decide you don't want to dedicate yourself to these insane strength pursuits. Like that's probably normal. It's got to be a little bit abnormal to say, okay, I want to put so much time, effort, sweat, blood, and tears into a giant deadlift, because that's a pretty niche thing, all things considered.
Yeah. And maybe that's also why I've even taken that approach, like as a coach, to help people and say like, well, this is where kind of this odd, old, original ideology or approach can help you break at least the fact that maybe you will never be advanced. Doesn't mean you have to quit pursuing strength.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's definitely goes back to the idea of kind of like expanding. Like, if you realize that you aren't willing to keep climbing this mountain because the air's gone super thin to reach the peak of your peak deadlift, you can just go climb another mountain. Yeah, It's in some ways it's easier, but at the same time, like it's better than just giving up. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah,
and sometimes you can't just live at high altitude. You got to spend some time somewhere else, and then you can come back to the high altitude later. So definitely expanding your scope of training has a lot of benefits, regardless of how far you want to take your primary focuses.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, but like I'll just see a lot of people quit. It's like I think strength needs to be in your life in some way, shape, or form.
I mean, I have never felt the desire to just completely quit, so I don't really know how to respond to those people. Like it's such a foreign idea to me. Yeah. And I guess this goes back to another thing that like a good lesson for beginners is build habit, because like that motivation will get you into the gym. Discipline will keep you for the first month, but habit is what is going to make like gym something you do for years and years. Like part of the reason I can't possibly imagine not strength training is because I've been doing this so long that the idea of removing that big part of my life is like, what else would I do? Like, it's just such a weird idea.
Yeah, 100%.
It's so habitual at this point that if I were to be forced to stop training, I would just be like, I'd be lost for a little bit. I'd have to take a lot of time to find a new direction in life because it's just so ingrained at this point.
Yeah, and I think the times I've personally felt lost with maybe my goals, I still like went and trained, even though it was like, you know, maybe it wasn't the best training of my life. It's like I just went and
like
just did some whatever, you know.
That plateau year, I'm like, okay, I look back, it's like, well, my total's gone up 10 pounds between all three lifts, between squat, bench, and dead. That's just because I shipped a squat PR that was probably high. I'm like, okay, I've accomplished by my standards absolutely nothing over 12 months, but I was still going. It's like, so my joints hurt, but I'm just going to keep going because I can't not go. This is just part of how I live my life now.
Yeah.
And obviously you should try and fix that problem. But yeah, just being willing to go even when you feel like you can't get anything out of it is important. You have to there's going to be bad times. You kind of got to push through them.
Yeah, 100%. You do have some really good shit around cutting too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And you've done some extreme cuts up and down a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that of all the things I've shared, like the most useful and a actual practical, actionable advice thing has been that cutting idea, because it is a bit outside of the standard and it's directly applicable. A lot of my stuff is kind of more conceptual, which I think is important, but it's not as directly helpful. But for anyone who hasn't read it, my stance on cuts after I kind of developed for the last couple of years is that I plan my training so that when I'm bulking, my focus isn't on peak strength or setting PRs. It's on growth and getting in all the stimulus I need to force that growth. And kind of the consequence of that is I'm constantly at least moderately fatigued, because you need to maintain a certain kind of threshold of fatigue to like force your body to grow. But that really chips down on your peak strength potential. But then when you're cutting, I don't expect I'm going to grow any muscle I'm cutting at this point. That's just not really realistic. So instead of just kind of banging my head against the wall and trying to grow while cutting, I completely shift my training to much lower volume, higher specificity on lifts I care about. Or maybe I just decide I'm going to take a really easy cutting period and just do a few accessories and then goof around with lifts every session, which is kind of what I'm doing now. It's very fun. But the idea is that when you're cutting, being in that deficit doesn't take away as much from your strength potential as you think, especially if you're programming in a way that facilitates setting a big lift. So if I'm cutting down volume, I'm cutting down my accessory work. And I think the example I've used in my post was a bench cut I did, where I benched every single day. Most of the days it was just like 5 reps of 315, just banged out, super clean, super easy, no grinding. And then once or twice a week, I'd shoot for a PR set. So I got that high specificity training in to really hone my technical skill. I cut down on fatigue because I wasn't doing nearly as much accessory work. There wasn't nearly as much demand in my muscles, so they were able to recover back up to like 100% between each session. And over the course of that cut, I went from a sub 4 plate bench, which I'd been stuck at for just ages, to finally benching 4 plate. And by the end of that cut, I was able to hit for 5 reps in a row in one session.
Wow.
So big jump on a lift that had stalled for a long time. That was all while I was losing like 10 pounds over 5 weeks. So just you really can do a lot just by changing your programming, even though the diet is working against you. And it just makes a lot more sense to me to do that kind of training while you're cutting, because that kind of training is not good for building your muscle. It's not even really good for building your strength. It's just good for showing your strength. And when you're cutting, you don't have enough energy to build muscle. You probably could build strength, but you might as well take this period that you're already, you're going to cut either way because you need to lose that body fat. Do something that accommodates that. Like this kind of training works just fine while cutting. It doesn't work against your goal of losing fat, but it lets you hit your PRs. And when you go back to bulking, your primary goal should be, actually growing yourself, getting bigger muscle. So do the kind of training that works for that, even though it's not necessarily accommodating of your biggest PRs. So I think that kind of goes against the neuron. It's like, why would you try and hit your big lifts when you're cutting? You don't have energy. Well, you have enough, especially if you cut down the accessory work that's making you so tired.
Yeah.
And, maybe don't hit the 5 sets of bench. You hit just the 3 or the 1.
That's very cool, man.
Yeah, it's
that's
just
a very different,
interested in that, read the whole thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I've been reading that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had a lot of people say that they've tried it out and then it works better than they expect. Like, yeah, I was surprised too. That's why I want to tell you about this, because it doesn't necessarily make sense when you are looking at it from kind of the standard viewpoint. But when you think about it and when you try it, it works out pretty well.
And I mean, I was a power lifter competitively for years. And that was always a vicious cycle of like trying to get strong as fuck before a cut. And then cutting to go to compete and like losing a bit of strength.
If you don't believe me, there's plenty of powerlifters. Like they cut down to hit their competition weight, but they're also running their peaking cycle at that same time because that's right before their meet. So they're peaking and cutting, and they're still hitting PRs at the actual competition. So there's another example of that working out. If you don't believe my saying it works.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I'm definitely really keen to get into that, as just for my own experience. Just kind of looking at. You do have good viewpoints with regards to like, you know, the science-based approach versus like the experience practical approach. It's just cool to hear your perspectives kind of shared in person too. Like,
yeah. So, I mean, I work in the nuclear pharmaceutical industry. I'm a research scientist. Like, I understand and respect science. So I'm not like, science is bad. I don't believe in science. Like, no, my problem with the fully science-based approach to training is that the existing like studies and data just aren't enough to stand on their own. Like the logistics of doing a like holistic study on strength, and with full scientific rigor is just not realistic. Like that's gonna take years. You're gonna have to have a super big sample size. You're gonna have to track a bajillion variables. It's just not work. So you get a bunch of little like snapshots of ideas because that's the best you can test with proper control in like a scientific setting. So you can take those little snapshots and they're informative. You can look at them, you can try and apply them, but you can't take a bunch of little snapshots and make a full training program. And this is not enough there. Whereas the anecdotal approach, it might not have the same level of control or the same level of rigor, but it's at least holistic. Like if someone says, I did this to get big and strong, sure, it's a sample size of one, but what it's looking at is the whole thing you're actually interested in, not just the strength of 6 college students' biceps over 6 weeks with creatine versus not creatine, which that has its place, but it's not building my entire training philosophy place.
Right.
And I think that right now the anecdotal options are a lot stronger than the scientific options. And I think that when I do want a scientific like outlook, I look for someone who has both the scientific background to understand the data, but also the practical experience to, contextualize it. So like my favorite source for scientific information would be Greg Nuckols over at Stronger by Science. Like I love his take because not only does he have the scientific background, he's read the papers, he understands material, he also is a very strong dude and a world record holding power lifter. So he actually can take this information, contextualize it properly. And that goes a long way to how he can explain it. Like a lot of his conclusions are this data says this, but like, don't put all your money on that because this is not enough power to fully support that. Like it turns things to a certain direction, but like you can't look at a paper and say, oh, I will train this way because this paper is telling me to. Like there's just not enough information there.
Yeah.
So you need to take the holistic anecdotal evidence that someone who's very strong and very experienced can give you, and then take those little bits and pieces, like I said earlier, but then more importantly, apply them and see what works for you. Because what works for a sample size of 12 college students, what works for one big strong guy, isn't necessarily what's going to work for you. You need to do your own study with your own N=1 because that's the only N that matters in your training. What works in a population is irrelevant to you as an individual because you're not a population. You're not some other strong dude. You are you.
Yeah. And I think we're really in this, moment within the industry where it's like some kind of bit of research comes out and everyone jumps on it and it's the new way to look at it and everything else is out the door. And it's like, and we've already seen this, right? With the whole spine flexion shit,
Big carcasses.
Yeah. And it's like, what happened the last couple of decades? Now we're coming back and, everyone's confused and it just really puts people, I think it creates these barriers for people and particularly where people like you and I specialize in strength. It just creates barriers to help people where we know so many people need to pursue this and have this kind of component in their lifestyle, but there's all this kind of fear around some kind of research paper that's blown up and everyone, jumped on because there was a way to potentially maybe make money off of it or create.
That's not potentially. I mean, that's where most of this is coming from. Like, there is a large audience of people that like the idea of science, despite not necessarily having the background to actually understand what science is. Because there's been a lot of time in the last couple of days. Like they made science sexy. Like, oh, this is what the science says. Like, this is cool. We got Bill Nye Science. We got Carl Sagan. We got the disgraced Neil deGrasse Tyson. Like, science is neat. Science has all the answers. Like, and that's not untrue, but at the same time, most of the general population doesn't have the understanding of what science actually is. So they just kind of take it at face value. So someone who wants to get a bunch of clicks on their video, they can take this paper, they can present it however they want, put however kind of emphasis they want, and there's a large population that's going to eat them up because it's science.
Yeah.
And it's kind of dishonest, and maybe some of them actually believe it. I don't think most of them do, because some of these evidence-based trained people are actually, relatively big and strong lifters, so I think they know better, but they're not there to necessarily tell their truth. They're there to produce content that will get views.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I do this, I've been doing this thing the last couple episodes where we just kind of, I talk about lazy gainers. Because, I think we all are to some extent. Like, even when I go through your diet stuff, I'm like, yeah, this is a lazy gainer approach because you eat the same thing every day.
Oh, yeah. The design, yeah. I love it because it's just so simple. I don't have to think about things. Like, I go to the grocery store, I don't have the list. Like, I bought the same things the last however many years. I just kept bing, 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 bing.
Yeah, and I'm very much like that, too. It's like when I'm going through, cutting or gaining, it's like I just need to eat the same thing every day and just hit these goals. Did you have any specific tips maybe for the lazy gainers out there, or someone that's like, I don't know, looking for?
If you're okay with just eating the same things every day, then it is really the easiest approach, because you don't need to count every single day. Once you have to audit your diet once and confirm, yes, it's got enough protein, yes, it's got enough whatever, yes, it's got my micronutrients, and then you just go from there. No more thought, no more thinking, no more like, what am I going to eat for dinner tonight? It's already decided. So I guess my suggestion would be, find things that you don't hate. Like, if you really hate a food, but it's a good gaining food, you're not going to eat every day. It's just not going to happen. You can force yourself for a while. Maybe you can convince yourself you like it, but try and find things that are palatable to you, which is easy for me because I'm not very picky. Like, I just like eating, period. So what that food is isn't a big deal to me. But yeah, I think most people need to probably be eating more vegetables than they actually do. Especially when I'm cutting, I eat a crap ton of vegetables, and that's why my grocery bill is actually higher when I cut versus when I bulk. But beyond that, eat more fruits and vegetables than you probably think. Be consistent with it. Another one, it's okay to deviate sometimes. Like, I had another period, like, this is going back, where I had my time where I was like, okay, once I got into the monotonous eating, there was a year or two there where I was very, very fixated on it, and it would give me literal distress if I had to deviate from that diet, and that's not mentally healthy. And I think everyone goes through that to some degree at some time. And it basically just took experience. Like, okay, I went home and I ate whatever was at my parents' house for these 2 weeks or this week or whatever, and nothing bad happened.
Right.
You just kind of have to experience both times. Like, as long as you're there 85, 90% of the time, that last 10%, it's not going to make a difference. And I think some people just need to experience that in order to become okay with it emotionally. And that is a step you really should take, because I think that eating for performance has the potential to kind of spiral into disordered eating patterns. And I don't know how common it is to go full-blown eating disorder, even though I think a lot of people say, oh, I've got this eating disorder, and realistically, they're kind of exaggerating. But I don't know. Just learn to be okay with deviating from your monotonous diet sometimes, especially if you're still making the progress you want to make. It's not mentally healthy to super fixate on it. It's meant to be a matter of convenience, not like a strict rule. Right. So I guess that would be the biggest bit of important advice, I think, is that it's okay to go off diet a little bit. Just not too much.
Yeah. What's deadliest lift cheat meal look like, or preferred kind of?
I don't eat cheat meals. Like, I always found that, like, if I plan, like, it's a cheat meal for the sake of being a cheat meal, I always like, oh, what am I going to eat? I can eat anything. And it's like the spectrum of choices is overwhelming, and then I always end up disappointed with whoever I pick. So my cheat meals are just like, oh, if I'm visiting my parents, I'll eat whatever they're cooking for dinner. I'm like, that's a cheat meal. Or maybe I'm at work and they have some donuts there. I'm like, well, screw it, I'll be doing it. That's my cheat meal. Like, I just basically take advantage of what the universe throws at me, versus seeing it like, okay, Sunday night's my cheat meal. Right. What am I going to have? Because I don't want to make that choice. That's too much power.
Yeah. That's actually a good way of thinking about it. And I think I've adopted the same thing too. Like, with even just when I have to sit down and eat with the family and stuff, I'm like, I can't be strict on what I'm eating all the time. Like,
the world's going to present you with chances to deviate from your diet. Just use that excuse then versus, artificially creating them. Yeah. And that also helps go into, dealing with well, what can I do when I can't eat my normal diet? Well,
Yeah.
unless it's happening like every other day, just do it. It's fine. That's your cheat meal. Congratulations.
No. So do you just like refer everyone to your Instagram as like your main?
Yeah,
social
I'd
media
say that's
platform?
probably the primary platform. Same username on YouTube, which is mostly just a video repository. And then TikTok lately, even though I'm not a huge fan of that platform, but my videos just kept ending up there. So I figure I should at least have a presence there so I can be properly attributed. But yeah, Instagram would be the main platform that I try to produce content through. And then also the Google Drive, which is linked in my Instagram bio, has all of the written content I have in document form, all organized and labeled, and then some other goodies too. So
Awesome.
if you like what you've heard here and you want to read more, I'd go to that Google Drive.
Awesome, man. I will attach that to the episode information as well. And yeah, thanks for sitting down and chatting shop with me, man.
No problem.
It's always cool to connect with a like-minded individual and just hear
a
a little bit more about your stuff. And
I'm always happy to be long-winded and just go on and on about these things.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
See ya.